Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Space. Before we begin our usual bit of housekeeping, I will turn it over to President and CEO of the International Association of Blacks in Dance, Denise Saunders Thompson.
Thank you, Taran. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today here for our program, Open Space, a connectivity series. And we are joined with some amazing men and women to have a really frank and open conversation about what's happening right now at this moment in time and how it relates to the business side of our industry as well. I'd like to welcome all of our guests, and you will get to know them in just a quick moment. Torrie Allen will bring greetings and introduce them. But before we start the program, I want to acknowledge, and I think we all are feeling what this world is going through at this moment in this present time. I want to acknowledge 1619. Just going to let that sit there for a moment. Decades, centuries. My ancestors, our people, our Black bodies have been assaulted for centuries. This is a time of reckoning. It's a time of revolution. And it's a time for our community to come together in a united voice around the injustices that have been happening to our people for as long as I can myself recall, my parents recall, my grandparents, great-grandparents, again, the ancestors. So I want to talk about and bring up institutional racism that is running rampant through this country. It is our duty, it is our job. We, the people, can no longer be silent. I support you in your efforts to call people out. It's time. It's time for us to be a coalition, to come together, to really stand strong in this moment in history. I want to take a moment of silence for those who have lost their lives to the struggle, for those who are currently on the front line of the struggle, and for those who need to get on the front lines of this struggle. As part of the African tradition, we take a moment to call out the names of those who have passed on before us. So I offer this time in this space for you to call the name or names of our ancestors. Baba Chuck Davis, Marcus White, John Richardson, Catherine Dunham, Pearl Primus, Alvin Ailey, Arthur Mitchell,
Ben Matthews,
thank you everyone for being here today. This is an important conversation. These are amazing people on this panel. I just met Torrie Allen a few months ago here in Washington, D.C., so I'm so excited that he's here to join us. I am here to listen and learn, and at the end of it all, let's do something, y'all. Let's not talk about it, let's be about it. Torrie, I turn it over to you.
All right, Denise, thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. Greetings. Greetings from, I think, what could be called the epicenter of everything that's been happening the last week and a half or so. It's been pretty traumatic here, folks, pretty traumatic. This offers a nice respite for some of the tension that we've been feeling. When I was contacted about hosting this, I said, yes, absolutely, this work is important. And I love the title. When Torrie first told me about the title, I said, does that have anything to do with Tina Marie? Because when I was a little bit younger, I saw Tina Marie with Rick James, and it was a fabulous concert. And I'm like, what a great idea. So here we are, elevating business consciousness in the arts. And we have a fabulous team, and I will kind of read their bios and tell you a little bit about them and sort of kick it off myself. Erin Carpenter is with us. She is the founder of Nude Barre. Nude Barre is a women's and girls line of skin-toned intimates and hosiery, empowering women and allowing them to love their skin and body 12 true nude shades at a time. Erin is on a mission to redefine the term nude by making skin tone options for women of all shades based on a series of embarrassing moments she had as a professional dancer where skin-toned undergarments were required but not typically made in 1 to 2 shades of beige by major brands. Next up, we have C. Brian Williams. C. Brian Williams is the founder and executive director of STEP Afrika. C. Brian Williams is a graduate of Howard University. After living in Southern Africa, Brian began to research the percussive dance tradition of stepping, exploring the many sides of this exciting yet under-recognized American art form, and he founded STEP Afrika in 1994. Brian has performed, lectured, and taught in Europe, South and Central America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, the Caribbean, and throughout the United States. He is the founder of the historic STEP Afrika International Cultural Festival in Johannesburg, South Africa. Under Brian's leadership, stepping has evolved into one of America's newest cultural exports and inspired the designation of STEP Afrika as Washington, D.C.'s official cultural ambassador. STEP Afrika is the largest African-American arts organization in Washington, D.C., and one of America's most celebrated and unique dance companies. Brian has been cited as a civic community visionary by Envy magazine, a nation builder by the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and minority business leader by the Washington Business Journal. His work is prominently showcased at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and Brian is featured in Soul Stepping, the first book to document the history of stepping, and several documentaries discussing the art form. Brian is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Mayor's Arts Award for Innovation in the Arts and the Pola Norinska Award for Contemporary Achievement in Dance. In 2018, Brian received the Mayor's Arts Award for Visionary Leadership from the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities. Next up, Erica Lynette Edwards. Erica is an accomplished consultant and public speaker who champions change to advance the art of dance. With diversity, I have my phone ringing there, forgive me. With diversity, equity, inclusion as the core foundation of her work, she transforms visions into reality. After a rewarding 15-year career as a ballerina at the Joffrey Ballet and 5 years as the director of community engagement there, she founded Cultivating Better Tomorrows through this consulting company. Erica reshaped the dynamics of dance studios to produce environments where all students can thrive, therefore positively changing the environment for professional dancers. Highly skilled in delivering consistent success and effective change, she is passionate about facilitating results-driven conversations and workshops focused on reflection and knowledge building. Her visionary leadership has earned her many awards and opportunities, including speaking on national panels, giving a TEDx talk, and being selected as a member of Crane Chicago's Business 40 Under 40. As you can see, we have a fabulous and well-qualified panel tonight. Welcome, panel. So as we start, I would like to take a moment to talk about, kind of set the tone here. and we'll talk about what's on my mind and ask you to follow my lead. So what's big and present on my mind right now is from Minneapolis is systemic change. Systemic change. Not a gesture, not a Facebook post, not a social media post, not a letter, not a diversity statement, but systemic change. I've been hearing about these kinds of issues since I was a kid, and it's time that we go past this. We got to get into the nucleus of the problem, and make some systemic shifting, change the structure, change the molecular structure, and have a different outcome. So that's where I'm landing right now. So I invite you to kind of step up as you please.
Yeah, I would agree with you, man. I feel that this is a powerful time for us all to really looking at rebuilding what happens next. And I sense a change in the conversation. I'm actually excited by the change. The African American community has a lot of work to do. We've always had a lot of work to do, but the urgency, I feel, is here once more. And I'm actually excited to build upon that urgency and really make some things happen.
Right. I'll jump in. For me and my personal household, where my husband and I are very into, just building generational wealth and helping other Black people in our circle and our community build generational wealth so that we can make a difference for people of color. And so, as I think of why I started Nude Barre, not being seen on the market through Nude industry where Black brands or Black owned brands are coming about, focusing on women of color. But I'm excited that there will be a shift, and it's starting to be a shift where we're going to see that for other businesses. So right now, with all that's going on, there's tons of people trying to support Black owned businesses right now. We're getting tagged. My brand specifically is getting tagged by a lot of people. Actually, right when I was waiting for this to start, we just got featured in Elle magazine or Elle.com. So there's a lot of positive things that are coming out of this, and I'm excited to see how that will flourish in the future for people of color and businesses of color. So I think it's kind of like dark times and scary, but it's also kind of exciting to see like there's something is going to happen, something positive is going to happen that's going to move us as a people in some positive direction, hopefully.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I completely agree with the systemic change needing to happen. Sharing a post is wonderful and it's good to see, but people really need to examine their organizations and also check themselves. Understanding systemic racism is a whole other idea than understanding individual microaggressions against people. So I think there really needs to be some historical analysis of your industry, of your company, and of yourself. What have you done in the past instead of just doing something now? If you built up a past foundation, that will probably be the foundation on which you grow. Also acknowledging that we all learn at different rates. So if we're talking about learning about systemic change, where are you in that learning process? Are you a kindergartner? Do you have a doctorate in this work? Where are you on that spectrum so that you can do some learning to catch up, but also to make some actionable changes?
Thank you for that. Something I'd just like to add before we proceed is the as our colleagues, our white colleagues try to step into this space. What are your feelings about credibility? Like what can folks do to show credibility? Because a fairly simple question, and that is, how do companies set themselves apart from their peers and counterparts? What do folks need to be thinking about? Or how do you how have you set yourself, how do you go about setting yourselves apart from your peers and counterparts? Well, I start with Erin.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, as a consumer brand or a product or a brand in general, um, one, it's interesting from my perspective because when I was starting Nude Barre, there really wasn't. There was like me and like another person doing what I'm doing basically. So there wasn't a lot of competition. There wasn't a lot to compare to other than that it just didn't exist. But now as more players are coming into the space, and I'm just speaking of, the nude category as a whole, like not just as dance products, but, lingerie and just the whole space. I think that everybody kind of has a different approach to it. Some people are 100% focusing on darker skinned women. Some people I'm coming from like this holistic approach of one, people of color come in all the color, all the shades, right? So just having like 4 brown shades really does, for me, in my opinion, it doesn't really capture the full category. So I like to, take my brand from this holistic approach of like really fair skin to dark skin. And that can mean everyone, that can mean people of color, whatever. And I listen to especially when it comes to the Black dollar, where we tend to be this afterthought. And so, it means something to the customers that shop at Nude Barre that I'm really actively thinking of them and I actually care.
All right, thank you. And Brian?
No, for Step Afrika, when we first entered the performing arts market, I'll never forget, there was nothing really representing the tradition of stepping for performing arts centers and theaters across the country. So for any entrepreneur, whenever you want to launch something, you want to make sure you have a clear, distinct voice and offer something distinct that's different, right? It's unique, especially when you're just starting. And I think that's been very important to Step Afrika. It's what's propelled us to exist for 25 years, hopefully for 25 more, is really focusing on what makes us special and really understanding that voice and what we want to bring to people. That drives us. And I love what Erin said about listening. A lot of times your innovation doesn't just come from your own thoughts of what you can do. Sometimes it comes from listening to your customers and to your fans, your audience, your base, and they can kind of tell you which way to go. So all those things help me to stay ready, if you will.
Yeah. Is there a formal process that you go through, like maybe once a year or once every couple of years, where you recheck your brand positioning? Or is this just something that comes out of you, just emanates out of you? Like, this is where we're going. This is what I feel in my spirit.
I think it's a constant conversation with our audience. When you manage your organization or your business, you're constantly listening, hopefully, and you're constantly responding to what the community has given to you at every performance for us, at every workshop, at every masterclass, right? But I will tell you, Step Afrika is getting ready to undertake a strategic plan. And after 25 years, believe it or not, it's the first in our history, right? So we've been operating on a plan for years. I would say a year-to-year plan, but now we're going to really sit down and invest in the strategic planning process and see if that creates a roadmap, recognizing that as we all know, these sands shift so quickly in business. You have to stay ready regardless, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't plan.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think living, sorry to cut you off, but just living in the world of, social media and people having more access to companies kind of allows you to take more feedback these days as well, right? People have strong opinions and they put it on social media and,
hear their feedback from what they want, and that's going to make you more successful.
Yeah, here's a sort of a follow-up to this question. Is it the listening? Is it formalized, or is it just like you log on to social media every day and you just kind of have a gut feel of what's happening, or do you go through a formal process of capturing this feedback?
I have to do a little bit of both. So, you know, I may be hearing kind of like some trends of questions or feedback, and then we may decide as a team to say, hey, why don't we just do a survey and ask the masses of our email base, or, you know, whatever category. And then also, a part of, I now brought on some investors into the business, and sometimes investors ask to speak to your customers, and they ask for the good and the bad, and for the customers to share that before they're actually going to invest in your company. So I end up hearing that feedback when investors come in, and some of them, you know, may say, you know, do what you want to do, and some of those investors are saying, hey, would like to see you address these things before moving forward. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's a
that's
little bit of both. It's like formal and informal.
yeah. So the investors actually asked to speak directly to the customers.
Yep. Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't
Mhm.
know if that happens always in the arts, at least that you're consciously aware of. But as a follow-up to that, how, as you go through the motions of running your company and leading your companies, how do you nourish staff? What is your thinking around nourishing staff and around nourishing yourselves, especially at times like this? I mean, if ever there was a time in history when we've been just hit back to back with COVID, with this huge eruption, how are you taking care of yourselves?
I'm terrible at this, to be honest. Well, like from a personal perspective, I think from like a team perspective, I do just check in with the team, whether it's just like a casual text, like, hey, just how are you doing? Let's, you know, hop on a call and just catch up, or, you know, a coffee or whatever. Well, now we can't in COVID. So now it's like, let's just hop on a Zoom and just chat. But I think for me, everybody on my team feels really comfortable with me, and that I do care about them as people, and they feel like they can talk to me, versus like, oh my God, my boss wants to meet with me. What is she gonna, you know, what's happening? What is she gonna say? But I think from a personal perspective, I would like to find ways to do better at taking care of myself. I mean, I do a lot of the, I guess, things that I've always done in the past, like prayer and some meditation, um, you know, a little bit of yoga here and there. Quarantine is like probably been one of the hardest times for my family and I. Like, my toddler is here running around, we're trying to work, so there just isn't really a lot of time to take care of myself. But
Right, I'm with you. And Brian?
I mean, it's such a passion. We're all in passion related industry, right? So it's like, you have to feel this. And so, Erin, I feel like I could do a better job, and especially in terms of with the team. But what I try to do is in terms of even hiring, we're looking for people who really love the work. But even when you love the work, you still have to take care of others and check in. So, but I would say that for entrepreneurs out there who are looking for people to bring onto their team, that passion really makes a difference. Because if they love the work, this is not regular corporate America. I'm a nonprofit. I have a board of directors. I have staff that must really love and believe in the work for this thing to work, because it's not a regular business, and this profit is not the motive. It's a larger contribution that we're aiming to make. So you hope to bring in people who feel that way.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Erica?
I think I do a horrible job with self-care as well. So I'm always like trying to work on that, but that's a whole nother story. I think as far as nourishing your team, you have to get to know people. You can't take care of people if you don't know who they are. And I have found that some people that I've worked with will be like, I'm fine. And you're like, I know you. When you say you're fine, you're not. And therefore you could have another conversation. You can follow up and figure out what's really going on with people. And then from there, take the steps to figure out what's best for them as an individual. But unless you don't know them, it's going to be really hard to find what they need from you. And when they don't want to be a burden on you.
Yeah. How do you folks feel about the responsibility of the leader modeling this work-life balance, right? Because on the one hand, we care about our staff and our employees, yet we know we have to show up and kind of do overtime. And so it can be, we can be sending mixed messages to the staff. Like, how do you navigate that space? Like, right? Any thoughts about that?
I mean, that's a challenge, you know. I mean, I'm like, as a founder of an organization, and that's something you have to really think about, because founders are normally 24/7, right?
Yeah.
And we're pretty aggressive, and that's what it takes sometimes to launch an organization. But you can't expect that really from anyone else. It's really not fair, you know. You can expect great work, great commitment, great passion, but at the end of the day, that type of and what I'll say is you can't expect it, but that doesn't mean you won't get it.
Right.
Right? If someone loves the work and they want to do what they can to be successful, and they believe enough in it, then it's fascinating to see that team come together behind the mission and the cause. So I think that then it goes back to the mission and the cause. That drives participation, enthusiasm, and it hopefully helps avoid burnout.
Yeah, good. Thank you there.
Yeah, I do a few things, but I try to have like real vacation time. And I let the team know in advance, like, hey guys, I'm gonna be offline. I need you guys to step up. I really need this time to kind of reset myself. And I think just setting those boundaries, or even like, hey, I have bath time with the baby at this time, I'm not going to respond to you, those just setting those boundaries kind of shows them that as a leader, I'm taking care of things that are priority to me. And I think they really respect that and admire that with my team.
Great. Great. Erica, do you have anything to say about that? Okay. All right. So here's the next question. How do we elevate representation of ourselves in other spaces, especially as we think about community now? The importance
Hate to cut you all off. I know we want to keep diving into this work, but we actually got to take a small little game break before y'all get too deep into this conversation. Everybody, for those old to open space, you know what time it is. For those new to the open space, this is our game break where we play two truths and a lie with one of our guests and find out a little bit more about them. We're going to actually start it off with, drum roll, Erin. So we're going to get to find out a little bit more about Erin through our two truths and a lie. What Erin submitted was, Erin is a mom. Erin was a ballet major at Marymount Manhattan College. Erin has a cat. Let's figure out which one it is. We're going to launch that poll. Feel free to tune in and find out. I know which one it is. I'm wondering which one. I'm wondering if y'all can guess which one it is.
How do you vote? I love this.
You should be able to. You should have options to click A, B, or C.
You're a co-host, Brian, so you can't participate.
I'm gonna have to steal that co-host privilege from you.
Thank you, Erica. I was ready to vote.
Look, it's okay. We're gonna ask. The difference is we asked all of you live, so so I hope you're looking at the answers.
Ooh.
All right. Now I'm going to turn it over to Erica and Brian. You had a chance to look at the answers. Which one do you think is the lie?
Erin has a cat.
I agree.
Erin, you want to tell us which one is the lie?
That is a lie. I have a dog.
She's a dog person. There we go. All right. Thank you all for indulging me just a little bit. I'll turn it back over to Torrie to take us into our next section.
All righty. Thank you, Toran. That last question was, as we were on the verge of that last question, and it might be worthwhile to kind of finish that off, right? And that is, how do we elevate representation of ourselves in other spaces, and how important is that? Because it's one thing to lead your company, and be company focused. But if you're going to have that impact, and I think especially we talked about systemic impact, we've got to figure out a way to go beyond ourselves. So I'd love to hear some thoughts about that. How do you show up in community in a way that's beyond ourselves, that's meaningful?
So I think that idea is the basis of my work in cultivating better tomorrows. I found through experience and through the experiences of my friends and colleagues that many dance studios are not a safe place, not an inclusive place, not a place of joy when they're supposed to be. And so that's why I've created trainings, both for students and their support systems, so teachers, faculty, board members, so that they can understand what should not be happening in a place. And I think we have a lot of work to do to change those systems of how a dance studio has run. There's a lot of, I call it trauma as tradition. Like, I was taught this way, and then I pass that tradition on to somebody else, and they pass it on to somebody else. And that's a horrible system that we are a part of. And that's where I'm making that change. And I think by making that change, we're going to be able to be in community with others. And that's the way I'm trying to reach that goal.
Gotcha. Thank you. Erin, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I guess I have to break it down into a few buckets. So the one bucket would be like the obvious, my company, and allowing women to be seen on the market, and essentially just telling my story. So being growing up as a dancer, and having to have the pink ballet tights versus the dancer of Harlem flesh tone, and having the process of dyeing, and just even how that kind of makes people feel in their psyche in terms of what is beauty and what is not beauty, what is right and what is wrong, what is the other and what is normal. Sorry about the baby in the background. But yeah, so I think that a part of what I do and why I exist as a company is elevating when people of color, and then aside from that, in a separate bucket would just be how I try to uplift other female founders, whether it's introducing them to other investors that I may know, whether it's, just having a 30-minute talk with them about what I'm up to, sharing resources, what can be helpful for, their business that was helpful for mine, and just being open to sharing that. I think that, having a network and just being helpful to each other is really only going to make us all better, versus feeling like, well, we're in competition, even if we're not in the same business or whatever. And even for people that may feel like they are a competitor of mine in my business, in my mind, like, if we all win and we can all change the perspective of nude and, in dance wear and fashion and beauty, like, that's good for everybody, versus just me winning over everyone else. That's how I view the space in general. So yeah, it would be those two buckets for me, just like being helpful to other women of color, and how I can help elevate them and as entrepreneurs. And then the other side, just why my business exists.
So that spirit of openness. Thank you for that. Brian, you want to say anything about that before we go on?
No, I think they handled it.
All right. So our next section that we're falling into now is sustainability, and that. So, what has been the best teacher when running a business? Experience or formal education?
I'll start. I'd say both, quite honestly, because the formal education gave me the skill set so that I could gain experience. A lot of times as an artist, there's something I'm big on. We spend most of the time focusing on the art and not on the business side of it, but it is very much a business. And I know that's the reason why some of our arts organizations struggle, because is amazing on stage, but the behind the scenes is not as strong. So it's an issue that we have to deal with. It's a capacity issue. How do we build capacity in the business as much as we've gained capacity on the stage?
Yeah.
I always focus pretty much aggressively on both sides. Luckily, my training was in the business, and that kind of supported me. But I'm a big fan of formal education as a foundation for a great experience.
Right. Do you think you would be where you are today if you had not been focusing on the business part of the operation?
No, I would not.
Okay. Thank you. That's important.
I say that very clearly because I think at one point as an artist, I had to actually leave the stage and focus on the work. And thank God it wasn't a hard decision for me because I can see a marked difference in the company from when I stopped performing.
Yeah.
In the quality of the performance, but also in terms of our opportunities that presented themselves to Step Afrika. So it's a hard decision.
Yeah. It's a very difficult decision. Any thoughts about that, Erin or Erica?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think that, any of from like a dance perspective, any of the training that I got was like my foundation. It was, it really developed me. And then the life part of it or the performance part of it was learned on, through me, through my soul, through being human and expressive versus someone teaching me to be an artist, if that makes any sense. And then from a business perspective, honestly, like I didn't go to business school. Most of the things about Nude Barre I learned on my own. I would, through some sort of self-studying. I don't know if you would call that life versus school per se, but I had to educate myself on manufacturing and that language in addition to business language, and educate myself on how to fundraise, how to speak to investors, which are not things that I learned in school. Even though I was a business minor in school and learned about entrepreneurship, being in a business and actually working in a business and experiencing it is a lot different from reading a case study on marketing for Coca-Cola. Like it's completely different. And generally the industry has changed so much from when I was in college to where we are now today. And just as like a small example would be social media. Like social media wasn't something that you learned in a textbook when any of us were in college, right? Or in high school, that's something you had to learn in life on your own. So ultimately, I think it's both.
Right. Did you have any mentors to guide you, or did you just was it all school of hard knocks?
I do have mentors, and I did have mentors along the way. I would say that you need people in all the different stages of your business, right? Like where you are in the beginning, and a mentor that can help you there may not be the same person that can help you in the 2 steps after that. So I'm always looking for mentors and people that can guide me for sure. And the way that I kind of approach that is always asking for help. I think that a lot of times humans in general, we want to pretend like we know it all. And, there's obviously the fake it till you make it, persona that exists, which is cool. Like you need that in certain rooms. But I think there's a big part of entrepreneurship, if you're trying to grow, where you need to be willing to ask people for help and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this piece of my business. Can you point me in the right direction of someone that can help me? And I do that every day.
Is there a place that you go for that kind of expertise? Is there like an online space where there are a bunch of people hanging out who could just help you out? I mean, how do you find those people?
Yeah, so the simple answer would be talking to people to find those spaces. And then, yes, I am a part of different networks, mainly that are around female entrepreneurship, female founders, and that are, trying to uplift female founders. And they'll have programming around, scaling your company, sales growth, whatever. And then the investors that I recently brought on, they're really great about, being supportive. And, when I send them updates on the business, like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what I need help with. And usually they'll reply and say, okay, we can introduce you to so-and-so, So again, it's just asking for help and talking to people. I've only been able to find those networks through talking to people and telling people I need help with this.
Thank you for that. And Erica, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I have a hard time with this question because when I left school, I left college to pursue my dance career. And the work I did at the Joffrey was purely based on experience. I was part of community engagement for 15 years while I was dancing before I took on the leadership role. And I had no formal education in that space. And my other concern with that is that I don't believe that my college arts administration degree would have provided me a good foundation to be a leader in that space. Because I feel like that degree wasn't based on knowing your community, being a part of your community, when that's truly what community engagement is about. So I have a hard time with that. I mean, when I would tell my students, yes, go to college, get your degree, it's mostly because that's how you get a job. Yeah. It's like you check off that box. I have a degree, therefore I can do that work. Do I have experience? No, but this paper says I can do it. That's why I value experience a lot more. I feel like sometimes those pieces of paper saying you can do it don't mean you can do it. And that's from like my sister in the corporation telling me stories, and my friends in corporations telling me stories. My friends who are like, this person was picked because they were part of a network, but they don't have the experience that I have to do this well. Yeah. So I think also, like what Erin was saying, it's very different if you're talking about education as far as being a dancer versus education as being a business owner. There's some things that are like, you have to know how to do this, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's the legal thing to do. And those aren't things that you can just, I think from experience, I think I know this. You have to know the legal constraints of owning a company. But I found so much value in my experience of doing the work, learning from my mistakes, and building up a network for people who have already done the work, giving me, sharing me with their experiences, with their failures and their greatest successes.
Yeah, I kind of agree with all of you. I've found a little bit of both, but I think when I started off initially into the business, I was shocked at how little the formal education did for me or prepared me for this space. And I really had to kick in a lot of my own personal ambition and drive. And there was a big experience factor, big experience. In our line of work, we have to wear so many different hats. And as we think about this, how do you make all the staff feel valued when everyone has to wear so many different hats? I mean, people can get burnout, people can feel like they're unappreciated. How do you make folks feel valued when you're kind of small, maybe not fully, you're not at full capacity, but you have to show up? How do you make them feel valued?
I think you gotta say thank you. You gotta let them know what they have done, and when they've done amazing things, you want to let them know they've done amazing things. You know, there's really no. I mean, of course, you know, one thing I really wish, one thing this pandemic has exposed in the world of Black business in particular, is that we're a little too small. A lot of us are too focused on 1099 contractors, not able to provide full-time steady employment to our community, to our artists, to our administrators. And a lot of Black businesses operate that way. That was exposed when this PPP loan came out, that if you didn't have W-2 employees, you couldn't even apply for it, right? So I really hope for the future that we try to create as aggressively as possible, and it's very difficult, long-term employment opportunities for our community, right? Full-time employment opportunities so that our organizations can grow and scale. It's hard to do that when everybody's part-time or 10 hours here, 20 hours here. Of course, we are historically under capitalized. Yes. Affects us, so we're gonna have to deal with that. I know that IABD is dealing with that issue, and I'm so glad to have a new source of funding for Black dance companies of color, because those are funds that will help you stabilize and hopefully invest more in the people that will allow you to grow. I mean, that's why Step Afrika has grown. It's really been the investment in the artist, full-time employment to artists. Y'all know how rare that is, right? The investment in the staff that allowed us to just do the grind that it takes to even compete in this very challenging environment.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and that is there a possibility for the funding world to step in around showing appreciation for general admin staff and recognizing the long-term impact of that kind of investment, right? That's something to think about. Erin or Erica, any thoughts in this area?
I can go down a long rabbit hole about black businesses being undercapitalized, but I think that's like kind of obvious. But I'll kind of answer first your original question around just making the team feel appreciated. Yeah, similar to Brian, like just saying thank you. You know, I try to cheer them on, my team, for very specific things that they do, like in the moment, so that, you know, they feel appreciated at the time. But I'm 100% with Brian. Like, I wish that I had a bigger team. I wish that I had more full-timers. I wish I had the capital to do that. And if any of you would like to invest, come, talk to me. Anyway, but seriously, and, all of that, like, the fact that less than 1% of venture funding goes to people of color is like ridiculous. And that's like globally, like that's crazy. And like I said, I can go down a long rabbit hole of this, but I would just say generally, I have been fundraising for a while for my company, and for Black people, the bar is always set way higher than our counterparts. And, there's so many people that I know, white guys that I know, that like, yeah, I raised $1 million off of my idea that I, met somebody in Starbucks and wrote it on the back of a napkin. Like, no business plan, no projections, like none of the things that I'm being asked for over and over and over again. And it's unfair, and that's the reality. But as I was saying in the very beginning of this, the one thing that I see hope for in the future is that there are so many people now that are, at least right now, saying that they want to step up and support people of color in their endeavors of business. So, whether it's spending money with them, I am getting more investors that are reaching out saying they want to diversify their portfolio and, all of that. So I hope that that's real, and I hope that that becomes a big shift for us so that we can, to provide more full-time jobs. Like, I really hope that that's real.
Yeah, I think it would be great to see how in the future we can sort of diminish this divide between for-profit and nonprofit when it comes to business, especially in the Black community. I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to make a difference, that should be the bar, not what for-profit, nonprofit, right? That's something to think about. And Erica?
Yeah, I mean, money's a real thing. When people are like, how can I value you more? It's like, give me more money. And you're like, yikes, like that's the one thing I can't do. And so when that's not an option, I look for other ways, like, oh, can you just take an extra day off? Checking in on people. Yeah, I feel like you have to find other ways to show that you value people, where they feel like what they're putting in, even though they're very passionate about it and they'll work their butt off to stay there and support you, that they're getting something out of it too, that they feel valued, not only monetarily, but in other ways. So it's just finding quick wins to see how you feel supported. If you go home early on Friday, do you feel more supported? If you can work from home in the beginning of the day, do you feel more supported that way? That's what I've been doing.
Okay. And how do you folks treat yourself? Like, what are some of the techniques you use to make yourself feel special? I know for a while when I worked in Brooklyn, there was an ice cream shop. And so twice a week. I would get the ice cream, and that was like my special treat, you know. But are there any techniques, personal things that you do to make yourselves feel better beyond like going to the bar or having a drink, right? Any thoughts there?
I mean, these ladies look wonderful. I'm sure they're taking good care of themselves. So, look, I think that's just, you have to take care of yourself. I mean, however you decide to do that, you need to just, I mean, I will say, regardless of what technique I choose, as long as it's building me up and not tearing me down, good sleep, hanging out, whatever it takes. I mean, I think that's an individual call that people must just know that you must take care of yourself. You must make room for yourself, or you can't show up.
Right. And in terms of sustainability, what do you think is the one of the most important things to have in mind if you're thinking about the end goal, right? The end goal for yourselves and your business. Like, what comes to mind?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is knowing who you are, and having a vision of why you wouldn't exist. And I feel like that helps keep me on track. Especially when I want to be like, oh, I can do this too, and I can do this too. I think recognizing my core values and my business's core values keeps me in a good path. Of course, reviewing those things from time to time to make sure that's still what I want to do, but that's what I do.
So I just have a question that the journey to discovering oneself can be long, right? It can just take you a while to kind of figure out who you are. What are your thoughts about how does one know what their truth is? If there's confusion, do you have thoughts about that? Like, how do you find your truth, your voice?
I honestly feel like from other people. I feel like oftentimes people are like, oh, you do that well. And I'm like, oh, I do. And I'm like, oh, like I should concentrate on continuing that if I'm getting the feedback that I do that part well. I think when we do a lot of truth seeking about ourselves, that we have a skewed version of ourselves in our head. And I think it really helps to hear what other people say. And not that what someone else says is going to be like, oh, they said I can't do this, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. But like having outside people, I think that you trust in to give you really an honest perspective of you and your work is helpful.
Yeah, that's important. I just remember growing up and sometimes hearing uncles and friends of uncles would say, or aunts commenting and saying things, he's trying to find himself. They can't find themselves. And like, so how can you find yourself? Like, it sounds like you folks have, but there may be other people out there who are struggling with that. And once they get it, things will just start to happen, right?
Yeah, I think we should really normalize finding yourself. I think that's fine. I think you're always in different seasons in your life of who you are and kind of getting comfortable with that. And that's okay. Like, let's just get comfortable with that. But along the lines of what Erica was saying, well, I think that as entrepreneurs, our job is to figure out what we're good at, right? That's a part of your job as a leader, and to really like lean in on that and then find people on your team that are better at other things, because you just can't be everything. You can't do everything. It's impossible. You won't be successful that way. So I think the listening to people and, kind of hearing like, you know what, like Erica was saying, oh, a lot of people are saying I'm good at this, is extremely helpful for you to kind of pinpoint what those things are. I think for me, like, just Nude Barre is very personal for me, and why I started it, and like my general mission in the long run is just for us to not really see nude as one color versus it being a very personalized thing for an individual thing for everyone. That's like my end goal. And if that end goal ends in I get acquired by a big company and that's amplified, or, you know, I crush everybody and I IPO and whatever. It doesn't really matter. My main goal and what I'm kind of laser focused on is like, how do we just completely wipe the idea away that ballet pink tights is the one way, or beige is nude is the one way and it's the right way? Like, how do we just completely change that? So I don't know, that's just a very personal thing that I think comes from why my origin story of why I even started Nude Bar to begin with.
Yeah.
And before Brian shares his truth, we're back at another game break. So we're going to learn some two truths and a lie about Brian. Sorry to jump in, you all. I love the conversation, but we are at that game break. So just a little bit of Black joy as resistance to share with the people for a second. So Brian tells us in his two truths and a lie that Brian has seen Prince perform live over 25 times. Brian has met Nelson Mandela on the campaign trail in Johannesburg, South Africa. Brian has danced on stage with Michael Jackson. I'm curious which one, well, I know which one is the lie, but I'm curious which one you all think is the lie. All right, the poll is launched now. Let's tune in and figure out which one Brian is not so truthful about. I see both of our guests, their eyes are racing. They're like, which one is it? He gave us such a variety. Gonna go about 10 more seconds. And all right, I'm gonna ask Erica, I'm gonna ask Erin, I'm gonna ask Torrie, which one do you think is the lie? Prince, Nelson Mandela, or Michael Jackson?
I think MJ's the lie.
MJ.
Iquel is in the comments also saying MJ. There are a bunch of people doubted this MJ one. Brian, if you want to tell us which one is.
I'm offended. I'm offended. You don't think I could dance with MJ? What the heck? It's a lie. That's hilarious.
Well, the man has seen Prince a multitude of times, probably the most I've ever heard a person see Prince, along with meeting the great Nelson Mandela. That's fantastic. But switching it back around, we were talking about how do you find oneself, and I think we were finding out your truth, Brian, in our last little bit of question.
For me, it was travel, quite honestly. I would say two things. Travel around the world brought me to my own personal truth, my understanding. But I will say I went to Howard University and I studied, my whole life I've been studying African American history and culture. And I took several courses while I was at Howard as well. And really studying my history, African American history and culture, and trying to know it as best as I can, knowing that there's still so much to learn, has kind of helped me shape my voice, you know? And so I always encourage, all artists, really anybody, to really know our history, know it well and study it as much as some others would force us to study another history, right? That has really helped me in my journey.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so we will advance now to the third section, which is innovation. And here's the question I'm going to put out to you folks. How are your companies innovating in this time of physical distancing? What are you doing differently? Erica, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, for Cultivating Better Tomorrows, this whole Zoom call revolution, whatever you want to call it, everyone's on Zoom, has really benefited me. It's so easy to connect with people and all over the United States, who would usually have to fly me in to come talk to them. And so I see less of innovation and more of opportunities in this time. I haven't had to innovate so much as translate what I would do in person to a virtual training. Yeah.
Okay, good. Erin.
Well, I was fortunate enough that right before shelter in place started, that I brought on a new investor. And so I've been able to kind of focus on some of the things that I wanted to focus on in terms of, trying to grow the business, and keep it alive, to be real, with just kind of things slowing down, and essentially, so many people losing their jobs, and not particularly in my company, but just around the world, around the country, and maybe not having the dollars that they want to spend, for whatever types of products and things like that. So, for us, we've just focused on our customers, spending this time talking to our customer, engaging with them online. But those are all things that we've been doing. So it's not necessarily unique, I would say. But yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. And Brian?
I think I've just taken my time with it. I've been trying to be very present in this moment. How everybody was talking about, I got to make the pivot. I got to do the pivot like right now. I took a little time with that because, as artists, some people I've really applauded have made that pivot and just figured out exactly what they wanted to do. That's not how it happened for me. I've been mostly moving kind of slowly through this process, trying to kind of refine my voice. I like to say, most artists, we specialize in, social gathering, not social distancing. So it's been a little shocking. As a performing artist, as a dance company, but I think I'm starting to find our legs. But then, of course, the ground keeps shifting, it seems, nonstop. So I'm being patient with myself and with the organization as much as I can,
Right. Along those lines, how do y'all, what do you think about how this this new time is going to impact our business models? Like, what are the long-term implications with how we show up as businesses? Any thoughts around that? I think that's got a lot of people on edge right now. Like, if I'm not aggressive enough, if I'm not innovative enough, will I get left behind? Is this the end of my business? Like, where am I going to be when the chips all land? Any thoughts around that, Erica?
Sure. Yeah. I attended one of the Arts Midwest Zoom conferences about innovation, I believe it was, with businesses and the arts businesses. And I really enjoyed it because people are talking about, this is the new thing we're doing. And I think the conversation went from, this is the new thing we're doing, this is how we're going to be innovative, to how are we going to maintain this? And then from how are we going to maintain this to, do we have to maintain it? So it's like finding whether or not the work that you're doing now because of COVID is a staple of the work in the future, or is it this what's happening now because we can't, like Brian said, social gather? Is your model now going to be used in the future is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Erin or Brian, any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think that companies just have to be flexible, but I think that's really what companies that's a mindset that companies should always be in, because you never know, things just change, or you may have a plan and it may not work, it may fail. There's tons of things that fail in companies, whether we acknowledge it or not, but failure is a part of how you learn and how you get better and grow as a company. So with that, you have to be willing and open to pivoting in those times where, you know what, that way didn't work, let's try something else. So I think this is a time where it's actually going to push a lot of entrepreneurs to have to really do that in a real way, that maybe they were kind of comfortable before doing it just, whatever, one way. So I think, virtual is going to be here for a while. I think that's just the reality. And I think we just need to get comfortable with that, as people, and then just thinking about what are creative ways that you can engage your audience. Like, I love that Swiss Beats and Timberland came up with versus, I don't know if you guys ever watched that on Instagram, but you know, and that's a way that artists get to engage and get a big following to, you know, they get to perform and do their art, but from home, you know, do the thing that they love. So I think that's awesome that they were innovative to think of that.
Yeah, yeah. And Brian, any thoughts about this?
No, I think they covered it, man.
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
Do you think, Erin, you had talked about failing. That could be loaded for folk of color, right? There could be a fear around failing too much in a like system, right? So, what can we do to empower folk of color around this failing thing? Like it's okay to fail, because I can see if you're in sort of in the system, someone or a group of people or funders saying, well, they failed too much, and that's just because they don't have the competence, as opposed to we just need to give them space to fail.
Yeah, that's a really great question and perspective. I think that if you actually spend time, if people spend time listening to successful people talk about how they became successful, many of them actually talk about failure. And I think because of that, that kind of made me more open to accepting that as viewing it in a different way, failure in a different way. Versus saying like, wow, you're bad at that. You failed at it because you're bad at that, or you're not smart enough, or whatever insecurities come around the word failure for you or us. But yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, just I don't want to say just white people, but people that are successful, they fail at things all the time before they hit their big whatever it was that made them great, or whatever it is that they're known for. And that's okay. I think we just really have to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in getting comfortable with it, I wonder if there's some way to sort of
And maybe that's mentors. You know? Yeah,
and broaden
maybe,
the discussion, right? Because
yeah.
I have personally witnessed double standards around this, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah,
maybe,
no, I see what you're saying, for sure. I mean, I think that, you know, we'll take like for my examples of like fundraising where, you know, someone may have a different bar than I do in terms of what they were able to accomplish or what they've done versus what I've accomplished, but I still need to do more. I'm being told that I need to do more. I definitely think that that's real. But I do think that, I guess the way that I'm looking at it is there's just different levers to what's going to get you from point A to point C, D, and whatever. And you just have to test things and try things. And technically that equates to failure or success, right? That's the measure. And that's just, it is what it is. So that's just how I view it. And the way that I present it to people would be, oh, we've tested this, and this, and we found success in this. That's how I explain it. And that comes off confident. That comes off as I have explored, I have researched, I have become knowledgeable about whatever it is that I'm doing. And I think that's fine.
good. Okay. Any other input on this topic right now? No. Okay.
I would just like to highlight some comments in the chat that are very strong, that are talking about who is allowed to fail, and and it's hurtful when you're working and someone has failed, and then the next day they have a job somewhere else because they failed at one place and then went to the next place to get hired. So I think that is definitely should be highlighted, as well as like what is up to be lost when you do fail. Like a business, like feeling like you failed and your business is gone is like you didn't fail at the work that you were doing. You're just doing really strong work. There's definitely a failure on how we're funded, who has the money. And just because you failed doesn't mean your work wasn't good.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this deserves some broader conversation, because I think it should be for people of color who own companies, who run companies. There should be greater license around that, but also as individuals coming into the arts or coming into entrepreneurial positions themselves within a company, granted the kind of space that other people have been granted around failing, because they're just learning, they're growing into themselves, and they need to have this space. So under traditional modalities, I could imagine someone being judged and not being, for making mistakes and not being given that space to fail, and having suffered some trauma because of that. So I think, this discussion around, you can fail at the institutional level, but you can also fail at the individual level, and that's okay, because you're building, you're growing, right?
Yeah. I tell you what, though, someone just said something in the comments, and this is where I think, for me, knowing my history and studying it has been very helpful. I don't really have any delusions of not having to deal with a double standard, right? Like, I think I've been knowing that from the jump, that this is what it is in this environment, whether it's fair or not. So the question is, if you're going to enter the game, and this is the game that we have chosen to involve ourselves in, then maybe if we could just remind ourselves that although it is frustrating and it hurts and all that, that cannot get in the way of you of giving it your best shot, regardless.
Right.
Because I feel that if I had burdened myself with the structure and the historic inequities that exist, regardless, right? I don't know if I would have kept going, and I don't think any of our ancestors would have kept going if they had really looked square ahead at the tremendous barriers that are in front. They're not going anywhere, and we can continue to fight and make it happen. But I will say this, though. I do think the historic and structural inequities that this country places upon our culture, they have to be dismantled. They have to be taken down. How to do that, I'm really not clear, but I know that we have to exist regardless. So therefore, I'm really interested in navigating the space, fighting through it as aggressively as possible, and building the capacity that can make it easier for the next.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, okay. Just had to take a moment on that one. All right. So bringing it back to COVID, should the way we've been engaging with each other as a result of COVID become the model for the new normal? Like, is the future some sort of hybrid form of what we've been experiencing the last few months? Or is this the new normal? Thoughts around that? Erin?
My husband and I talk about this all the time, actually. I think it'll be the normal for a while, essentially until everyone's vaccinated. But I do agree with what Denise said, put in the comments, that through dance, you need to be in the same space. And I agree with that as well, like just as an art form. I don't know how you kind of move forward the art form where it's virtual forever. So I think at some point it has to go back to normal. At least I hope so.
Yeah, me too. And Erica, any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I feel like COVID sucks, but some things we've learned from it are that many people who ask for inclusive practices like working from home automatically get them because they have no other choice. And I don't like to using the term the new normal, because like this has changed our lives and it's going to change our futures. And so what part of our inclusive practices that we have created can continue? And what things that we have done that have to function a certain way, like dance, can be celebrated when we move forward? and not only celebrate it, but put like as a priority of like, we need to gather to do this work. So when can we? It's so hard since we don't know what's happening. So many people have died. We don't know about vaccines. We don't know about funding. And so it's really hard to describe or to predict or to envision what's going to be next when we're just in the land of the unknowing.
Do y'all think that if we consider the digital divide and the access to technology and technological infrastructure, are we going to see greater disparity in how organizations of color show up in the future because they don't have these systems, they don't have the technology, they don't have the infrastructure? Is that going to start to surface more as an issue in the future? Any thoughts, Brian?
I think yes. Like we're seeing that in education, right? Black and brown communities versus, white communities and education needing laptops and internet, and like we see that already in the world. And so who are those children's parents? Where do they work? You know what I mean? So I think yes, I think we see that already for sure. And again, this kind of goes back to the funding topic. Like those companies need the funding to provide those things for them, those tools and those supplies for them.
So making sure that these, more so than ever, these folks have funds to actually show up, I think is going to be hugely important, because there's a chance of the bigger institutions owning the digital space and then sort of curating what it means to have the sort of Black space or the Hispanic space or the whatever space, but it's basically these macro institutions doing it and not those organic, root-based, organization-based companies doing it, because they simply can't compete. What do you think about that? Brian, any thoughts around that?
No, I'm more just thinking about, this conversation has me thinking about a lot of different things about working together in particular, collaborating more aggressively. I think about IABD's development it's been around a long time. And then the difference that Denise Saunders Thompson has made by becoming a full-time employee and able to really invest. And in just a short period of time, she's been able to kind of really exponentially expand the possibilities with this kind of forum. And it's really quite fascinating. So I'm looking at, just as we go to the future, I'm working right now on an initiative actually to bring arts organizations of color in DC. It's going to take some time to discuss what it is that we need to be successful, right? With all these conversations about equity right now, if someone was to ask us today and walked up to us and said, what do you need? And all we could say is money, I don't think that would be sufficient. Because money, there'll never be enough money to really fix the problem. So it's gonna have to be something more. It's gonna be money plus, money and this. And so I'm just looking at these questions that we have to answer so that we can present them collectively, not just as my individual organization, but what our sector, our field needs to move through this,
Yeah.
But I would hope that our peers around the country will start to look at the challenges that they face in their cities, not just individually, but collectively, and start to see if they can petition and lobby their local government to see what might be possible that they couldn't do by themselves.
Yeah. Do you think there's space and opportunity for, like in the early 70s, there were folks, I think there was this kind of consciousness and there were initiatives like, I think it was the Southern Black Cultural Alliance. But I think those have kind of faded away. But I think this is an opportunity, especially around the digital age, where for these alliances to at least to begin share tools and resources to make sure that they're not just, they don't lose that curatorial power, that curatorial independence, right? And whether you're nonprofit or for-profit, that you don't lose the ability to have your own voice, right?
Yes.
Erin, I would hate to have you absorbed and then lose your voice, lose the curatorial power of your product.
Mm-hmm.
You get what I'm going at here?
Yep.
And so it would be interesting for the field to have some discussions around this, like in the end, as we advance digitally, how do we not let independent, small organizations of color lose their own curatorial power, their own voice, and not be absorbed in some bigger institution, some bigger institutional pathway?
Yeah.
I think if I may, I think I'm gonna pause that right there because we're coming up in our community section, and I think that's a conversation that I would love to hear from the audience about. But let's do our last two truths and a lie, and also our dance break to get the bodies up and moving because we've been sitting in these chairs for a while. So let's get to know Erica Lene Edwards a little bit. All right, Erica tells us that she went kayaking in Hawaii. Erica has went snowboarding in the Swiss Alps, and Erica has rode on a motorcycle in Chicago. Let's see which one is the lie. I'm like, I don't know. You're an adventurous person, Erica. Like you be all over, so I can't guess that one easily.
I chose these because I'm not an adventurous person, and that's why it's weird that I can put these up here. I'm an inside girl.
I don't know. Every time I see you on the move, like you between the burbs, you be between the city. So I think you gotta give yourself a little more credit. I'm actually gonna turn it over to Brian and Erin to guess which one is the lie, or Torrie. Can you tell us which one you think is the lie?
I think snowboarding, since she said she's an inside girl.
Snowboarding too.
Okay, I'll go with snowboarding.
Okay. Erica, can you tell us which one is the lie?
Yes, the correct answer is kayaking in Hawaii.
Wow.
Hey, I was younger and I don't do these things anymore. I'm retired from adventure. I like safety.
Aha, she said she retired from adventure. So there's a wild child, a time before time. And now we get to go to my last of two favorite moments, our dance break. So we invite you to come on screen. Everybody who's in the audience, we invite you to get up out your chairs, dance in your chairs, however you want to. This is our dance break. With little Miss Jackson. Denise, where you at? Thank you, everybody, for indulging me again. You know, Black joy, dance, as we know it, our career field is a form of resistance. So seeing all your wonderful faces on this screen as a way of showing resilience in this time. And now we go to our last section, which is our community section. And Torrie brought up an interesting point that I think will lead us through this section of how do we cross that digital divide? How do we challenge these macro institutions from absorbing these minor institutions? How do we keep a voice in these times? How do we cross that digital divide in these times? I invite the audience to respond aloud, respond in chat, however you feel.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback there.
Say it one more time, Torrie. I'm sorry.
Torrie, if you would like to rephrase the question for me just a little bit.
Sure. Some questions?
Yeah, what was the question that was just asked?
About how do we cross the digital divide with these large institutions?
Oh yeah. So as we cross the digital divide, how do we ensure that we don't lose our independent curatorial voicings, right? And that we don't get absorbed into the curatorial vision of these mammoth institutions all over the country, right? How do we protect against that kind of homogenization?
Right, because they want it, right? So that's an issue. And I'm like, this is Denise, I'm sorry. You're in my wheelhouse. And I mean, I'm going to say this, and it'll be a little controversial, I know. And it's probably, I'm not going to call myself old, I'm not, but I have an old spirit. The dance of the people is the dance of the people. And our dances, our bodies, no matter what the dances are, come from within. And there is something to be said about the creation of our dances and the fact that they are constantly co-opted. Our culture is constantly co-opted, and we never reap the benefits like we really ever should. And so I feel like we have to figure out a way for us to center ourselves and the work that we're doing and create that structure for ourselves, because they're going to always want it. They, white people, I'll just say it out loud, won't always take it. We are learning from them. And when you talk about the looting and the rioting, this is what's happening. It's coming full circle. We learn from you. What you do comes back. It's karma. It is plain old karma. So how do we take ourselves out of it? We have to center ourselves, the work that we do. We as a people, we need to come together. We have to find those 1, 2, or 3 things that are going to propel us in conversation, in dialogue, in unity. Agree to those 3, 2, whatever they are, knock them out, and then go on to the next. But we have to decide willingly to move in that direction. So for me, I'm like, okay, can I say it? Oh, this is closed caption. F all of that. And let's figure out how we as a people move forward. That truly, for me, is the only way. That's what this organization, IABD, was founded on. That was the principle of it, is us coming together to work out our own problems and address them so that we can move forward and forget all them other folks. That's all I gotta say. Love y'all.
Well, I can see a beauty in that. If these units are being restrained, the sector and the country has not really seen the full beauty of what's out there. They have not been allowed to have curatorial independence. We have not yet seen the full beauty of the creative capacity, the power of people out there, right? That alone should be a reason why we uplift independent curatorial power.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think you're so right. We haven't even begun to see the power that is out there. And when you're not hearing from all voices equally and not providing a platform for all voices to come forward, then you're missing something. So I look forward to us as a people, as a society, more so really valuing, because I think everybody will win once that happens, you know? I mean, we don't know, there might be a cure for, who knows what the cure for whatever disease plagues us might be in Benin and Cote d'Ivoire and India. We don't know where it is, but if we don't provide an access for all people to come forth, then we might just miss it. And I don't want to miss it. And I don't want our society to miss it. So I think that's a very good point.
I think it's something interesting in the word monolith too. We also have to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable for not monolithizing each other, thinking that the systems and things that we need to come up with need to be a consensus, right? And that word consensus gets thrown around a lot in the sense that it doesn't allow us to be nuanced and complex and different, even though we share similar cultural ancestries, right? And so a lot of the ideas is also pushing back on needing to fit into a box. Like we were talking about successes and failures. And I said wax poetic in one conversation. I'm not sure if that was here or the other chat that was going on at the same time, but unless we allow for the space for us to define what success and failure is to us without it being super inscribed or superimposed onto us, then we continue to marginalize each other and ourselves, because we don't allow for the space for each individual curatorial practice to define success and failure in their own ways, even if it's not the way that someone else is defining it.
I can tell you this, folks, from my experience in New York City when I was there and the opera world. And I kept wondering, how come people keep doing Porgy and Bess? Like, come on, like, why everybody? There's other stuff out there. And then when I started getting into the Black opera community and discovering that there's all of this other work by Black composers that had not just recent, but in the last 100 years, why are these companies continuing to do Porgy and Bess or variations of Porgy and Bess? And so all of these other voices that are powerful, that are interesting, that are different, that are vibrant, that have not been allowed to surface to the level of Porgy and Bess. Right. So why does Porgy and Bess define? Why have we allowed it? Why has it been allowed to define Blackness in the performing arts at a certain level?
Because if it's the standard of what whiteness says that Blackness is.
Senate. Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, most of the work is about that. Most of the work is how whiteness defines Blackness, and then everything that people of color does is always used against that as the measure of standard. And we need to be careful of that and destroy that, because then we can't allow everything else is not rising to the floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I talk a lot. That's how Quell, by the way.
But I mean, I have to ask the question to counter what you said, Torrie. Like, well, but why don't we know about the community? Like, that's on purpose. That is absolutely on purpose. We know about it. I know about the Black violinists. I know, we know that, but how do we get it out there? It's not meant to be out there by those who hold those systemic and racist practices. It is on purpose that the volume and the breadth and knowledge of what we do is actually held down every day. I mean, I'm going to go to the image of, George Floyd and the white man's knee on his fucking neck. Like, that's some real shit. That's real. And it's on purpose and it's intentional.
I don't know about you, but I've noticed this, and I like that as a metaphor, because in the opera world specifically, when I started becoming familiar with all of the incredible talent out there, Black talent, that you weren't seeing on stage, that was not being allowed to be on the stage, right? And so it's horrible. It's horribly racist, right? But what's really happening is the world has not been able to see the very best talent, right? That's been blocked out. So how do we, and so as we all suffer because of that, because we don't really get to appreciate the full vibrancy of what it means to have a creative nation. When you're stepping on the neck, to use this metaphor, of a sector, right? And how can we change that? It's not just about what happened to George Floyd, that was horrible, but that's happening in other places, and it has been happening.
But you know, I would, sorry, I don't know if I have a fully formed thought, but I do think that the world gets to see the full value of Black art, and it's been capitalized on. And what I mean by that is, as a Christian man that grew up in the church, I go to FCBC in Harlem on 116th Street, and I see all the lines of white Europeans that come and line up to hear Black vocalists who are not recording, but they are in the church singing. And there's something about that that lets me know that there is some sort of transition of understanding how great the Black art sector is, at least in that frame it's about music and gospel music, that lets me know that the word is out there. And we know it, we see it every single day. I guess the question is, how do we then promote it from within us and not allow outside organizations to define that promotion through funding or through needing to book us in certain spaces in order to put their stamp of approval on us that validate us, when in fact people come from all over the world to see us in our own spaces, but we're not allowed to value ourselves in our own spaces unless we're at the Kennedy Center or Lincoln Center or the Joyce. Sorry, I went there.
I know we're dominating this conversation, but I gotta say this thing and I'm gonna shut the hell up for real. When COVID-19 broke out, I watched 45 parade the pillars of this country on national television. The pillars of this country are white. There were white men in the medical field, in the airline industry, in the office supply industry, in electrical, whatever, the electrical companies. All of those people stood up there and thanked Mr. President for enacting whatever presidential thing he did to get them more money during this pandemic. I don't know how many Black people realize how much money these folks are making off of this pandemic. This country is rooted in those institutional frameworks. And yeah, they like Black culture, but we're not making the kind of money they're making. We talk about that 1%. Like, come on, people. This is a real thing that's happening right now. The vaccine from the Black woman over here, right down the street at the NIH, you see how quick they shut her up.
Talk more about that. I don't know that.
Yes, there's a Black woman who, right here at NIH, is on the cusp of discovering a vaccine or whatever the processes are for that. And it's been quieted and shut down.
She has been the most foremost researcher in coronavirus vaccine. Yes. And they terminated her funding because she was researching SARS and MERS. And when Asia got SARS and MERS under control, they didn't need her anymore. So they took her funding away from her. And now all of a sudden, everyone's clamoring to review her research, which she has been doing before this pandemic. And a lot of people are building off of her research and everything that she did when it was both underfunded and then they cut her funding. And she was on the cusp of developing two different vaccines for SARS and MERS. And since they're related to COVID-19, it actually could have helped the acceleration of the development of a vaccine if they continued to fund her. But they cut her lab off when they were like, okay, you're no longer needed. This is never going to be a thing in the future.
So the systems are really, it's deep.
Yeah. And
before we go too far, I know.
Sorry.
And we're not, and look, I tell you, I ask you all to hold on to this conversation. Join us in our open space after space. to continue the dialogue. But as far as the episode, I got to wrap us out because it's costing me money. So just being very honest. Thank you. Thank you for the end of this episode. Thank you, Torrie Allen. Thank you, C. Brian Williams. Thank you, Erica Lene Edwards. Thank you, Erin Carpenter, who had to go to the baby, for all of your amazing thoughts and sharing here on this space. Thank you to Jay Jimson, who is a wonderful dancing hands, definitely gave us an amazing ASL experience. Thank you to Diana and the closed caption team who provide us with wonderful services. We're just constantly elevating the brand each episode. I'm gonna share a screen as I usually do to let you all know about our next episode for our Facebook fam with Tiffany Ray Fisher, talking about Are You Not Entertained? Adapting Dance in a Shifting Landscape. Sure to be a good episode because we have been wondering, how do we keep this thing going? How do we keep dance going in these trying times? I thank all of the partners, KMP Artists, SGA Management, my team, the International Association of Blacks in Dance. I want to give a special shout out to Vanessa Leveros Hall, who was our guest curator for this episode. She did a wonderful job of pulling these minds together and curating this topic. So I just want to give a special shout out to her. And our next episode is another guest curator, but I won't drop it ahead of time. I'll let her be shown when the time comes. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. And let's see how I want to end us out today. I'm going to end us out with with one of Torrie's favorite songs.